Mohammed, do you have the run of show so you can follow along?
Again?
Do you have the run of show?
He and I reviewed it.
Okay, all right.
We are live. Having an issue with Instagram, but let me fix that quick. Apologies. Okay, well, I will worry about Instagram in just a sec. Let's go ahead and do intros. I can worry about that when you're doing your piece, Oscar. So hello, everyone. Thanks again for joining us for our second series on Israel and Palestine and some of the facts on the ground happening there. Wanted to kind of give a brief little intro about who we are and who's on this panel with us. And then we will jump into the rest of the things. So my name is Jacob Thomas. I use he, him pronouns. I am our communications director at Common Defense. We are the nation's largest grassroots organization of veterans working for a lot of different policy outcomes across the country. One of those being anti-occupation work, anti-war work. We come out of a space at Common Defense where we helped lead the charge back in 2019 and 2020 to end what we labeled as the Forever War, which was our occupation of Afghanistan for 20 years. We are very proud of that work and doing that anti-war work there. And through that work, got connected with an amazing group called Breaking the Silence out in Israel, whom one of which is joining us today in Becca Strober here. Breaking the Silence is I'll let y'all do probably a better description of who y'all are. But the brief overview, Breaking the Silence is also a group of Israeli Defense Force veterans who, like ourselves, were doing anti-war work, anti-occupation work, was founded in 2002 during the Second Intifada to speak out against the systemic human rights violations and human rights issues involved with occupying a people in very similar ways to what we were doing to try and push our government to end our occupation of Afghanistan. And so through that work, we've got connected. I was privileged enough to join a delegation in 2022 to go over to Israel and the occupied territories of the West Bank to explore and learn more about the occupation and about a lot of the things that we're going to be talking about today. But that is our brief overview, both of Common Defense and Break the Silence. And I will let you all do a deeper dive. But I do want to kind of let you know who all is on this panel. So Oscar is on our staff here at Common Defense, based out of California. Lucky to have you here. We've also just had a baby, so we're very appreciative that you are here joining us for this as our deputy political director. And then Becca and Mohammed, I will let y'all introduce yourselves, but we are also super, super glad to have y'all here with us. So maybe we'll start with Becca, and then Mohammed, let you introduce yourself as well.
Yeah, so I'll do just a quick introduction and then hand over to Mohammed, and then we'll get started. But my name is Becca Strober. I'm a senior director with the organization Breaking the Silence. We're an organization of around 1,500 soldiers who served in occupied territories, so the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and Gaza. I think it's poignant to say that the 1967 occupation started exactly today, 57 years ago. So unfortunately, that's a kind of moral catastrophe that we're now marking 57 years of. And I served between the years of 2008 and 2010 as a shooting instructor, and I also spent some time serving in the West Bank, mainly guarding settlements. And at Breaking the Silence, we basically collect testimony of our time in service. And after we verify that testimony, it becomes the base of our educational work, in which we talk to Israelis and internationals and basically anyone who's willing to listen about why we believe that the occupation is an inherently immoral project, and there is no way to do it morally because it inherently involves control and violence. And so having been participants in that violence, we now stand to try and end that violence as Israelis. And I'll hand it over to Mohamed to introduce himself, who I'll just say is one of our, who is with Youth Against Settlements, who's one of our, I think, most important partners, and it's really a privilege to work with you guys. Mohamed.
Thank you, Becca. Thanks, everybody. My name is Mohamed. I'm from Hebron, born and raised in Palestine, Hebron, Khalil, as we call it in Arabic. I'm a Palestinian journalist, and also I'm a political activist. Part of Youth Against Settlements, and Youth Against Settlements is a Palestinian organization that does, it's a non-violent organization, non-partisan. We do a lot of work here in Hebron. It's mainly to make the occupation costly and raise awareness about what is happening in the West Bank and in Palestine, and how the occupation affects the life of Palestinians, and how is and also we usually do advocacy within Palestine and outside of Palestine, and we organize tours, we do direct actions. This is our work. We're based in H2 area, and people are asking and wondering what is H2. It's basically part of Hebron that is under Israeli army control, where settlers occupied Palestinian homes. So it's a settlement area. So I'm basically at the organization now, at the house. So yeah, talking about H2 usually in our organization, and talking about the difficulties that people face living under the Israeli army control in a settlement area before and even now, which is harder. So yeah, it's a pleasure meeting and talking to everybody today, and
yeah, so thanks so much for being here. I think that's actually where we had dinner one of the nights, was out on the patio that I think you're at right now. So yes, thanks so much for being here. Oscar, I know you wanted to give us a little recap of the past panel that we did 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, thank you, Jacob, Becca, and Mohamed for being here. This is going to be a fantastic conversation. Folks, yeah, I'm Oscar Arbulu here, Deputy Political Director for Common Defense, a Marine Corps veteran. I'm going to give you a quick recap. This is an important series of 3 events that we're doing on this issue area, because we want to bring light to not only what's happening currently, but what has been happening. And from these perspective of veterans is super important. In the first program that we did 2 weeks ago with Breaking the Silence, we discussed the IDF's from Amir's point of view, what was happening in Gaza, and the perspective, right? The military perspective of what an operation can look like. And it was very enlightening to be able to hear something like that from that perspective, right? Us as soldiers, anti-war soldiers coming in saying, hey, when we did X, this is what we were supposed to, these are the guidelines that we had, rules of engagement. And to hear Amir's perspective, I think is super enlightening and is missing, I think, in a lot of discourse. And I think in American discourse, we assume that when conflicts happen around the world, that it's under the same guidelines of, oh no, you're supposed to do it like this, like what the Americans think, hey, we're going to make sure that civilians are 100% accounted for, and et cetera, this. And what Amir gave us was a completely different perspective. And I think that's important to understand. Hopefully somebody with the tech can a little bit later shoot the link for our YouTube page that has that, so you can check it out. 2 weeks ago we had ours. You can check that out on our Common Defense YouTube page to check that out. And yeah, and then I want to do a quick little promotion, folks. This particular conversation is super important because we're going to have a follow-up conversation on the control of Palestinian movement. Next week, we're going to be having a conversation with the director and executive producer of the film The Present. And The Present is a 25-minute short film of a scenario of the control of movement through a checkpoint. And it's going to be a great, a great perspective, a great time to be able to listen to the director, their perspective of creating this film, and the executive producer. That registration form hopefully will be somewhere streaming or linked somewhere. But I'll leave it for the text to do that. You can catch that film ahead of time. It's called The Present. You can rent it on Apple TV, YouTube, and on Amazon. If you have Prime, it is free on Amazon Prime. However, though, with our registration link, you will be able to get a free link so you can watch it for free ahead of it. And that way you can have a little bit more background on the actual movie before you join us for the conversation next week at the same time, which will be 11 p.m. Pacific Standard, 2 p.m. Eastern. And yeah, I think I'll stop there. There's plenty to talk about, but I want to make sure Becca and Mahana get their important conversation going. So I'm going to kick it back to Jacob if you have anything else, and then we can get this started.
Sorry, I was speaking of tech things, so it's helping do some tech things. Give me one sec here, and then I'm just going to reassign this. There we go. So thank you all so much. And I guess it would help to say too, so I'm an Air Force veteran of 8 years. I think I forgot that part. I think if we want to start, I don't know, Becca, if you want to kind of help intro us into this next piece, and then have some time for Q&A. What I will kind of just speak on too, for any of those watching, both on Instagram, Twitter, or YouTube, any of those comment spaces, we will be able to see those come in. So if you have questions throughout, put them in there. We do want to have some time at the end for a Q&A. So if you do have those questions, pop them in here, and we'll have some other banner things that'll come across to help kind of give people some interactive things to do as we go through. One of those things, I know, Oscar, I don't think you had mentioned it just yet, but we have been doing an LTE campaign, and of course a petition as well to create a permanent ceasefire. And I'll just kind of have those pop out throughout. But for anybody, whether you are a U.S. military veteran or an Israeli Defense Force veteran who is a U.S. citizen as well, or any military family members, we encourage you to sign this. Civilian supporters, it doesn't really matter. We want as many voices as possible on this, leading from the veteran voices, calling for a permanent ceasefire, as well as some other demands. You can check out the link there. But the reinstatement of UNRWA funding, as well as actually holding Netanyahu and his government accountable to do the things that we all know need to happen, which is create a lasting peace within the area, and figure out how we get there. And we all know that is not a military solution to peace. And as part of that, if you are a veteran who wants to speak about this topic, we also help do letter writing campaigns. So if you want to write an LTE, we just had 2 different ones published in the past couple of weeks. One from an all-star member out in Tucson, Arizona, Melissa Cordero, talking about the importance of a ceasefire there in Arizona in one of the papers. And then in the Napa Valley Register, we just had last week another one get published calling for a ceasefire from an Army vet, I believe. So if you want to be a part of that, you can contact one of our organizers at organizing@commondefense.us to learn more, and we can help figure that out for you, figure out what papers to send to, and help you with that process. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Becca.
Okay, great. So maybe I'll talk for about 10 minutes and then I'll hand it over to Mohamed to give his perspective and experience. So first of all, Oscar, you mentioned that in the conversation last week, there was kind of a little bit of an understanding of differences of how the military actually functions to even how, for example, the U.S. Army functioned in Afghanistan or Iraq. I'm definitely not an expert on either of those situations, but I do think there's 2 things that when it comes to control of movement in the West Bank and in general of Palestinians under our control, that are very, very important to understand, because I think they're huge differences than the occupations that you see the U.S. carry out. And they really affect how the system works. And the 2 differences are that the control that we are maintaining, and I say we, I mean Israel, that Israel is maintaining in the West Bank, militarily in Gaza, in East Jerusalem, is meant to be indefinite. Meaning, and so, regardless of how the occupation of Afghanistan was carried out, there's no question that on day 1 that there was boots on the ground, there was an idea that boots will not be on the ground at some point. And that is the opposite of how it is in the West Bank. And when it comes to the Israeli occupation of Palestine, the idea is that there will be boots on the ground indefinitely because this control is indefinite, right? And so when it's indefinite, it's inherently zero sum. It inherently means that if our control is permanent, then Palestinians cannot have political rights indefinitely, right? Palestinians cannot have civil rights indefinitely. Why? Because if they have political and civil rights and have self-rule, then the occupation isn't working. There's no occupation, right? So if the idea is to control, then you can't have those things. I think that's the first thing. The second thing is settlers. And I can't emphasize enough how important the reality of having Israeli settlers inside a place like the West Bank is, because what you have is Muhammad and another 3 million Palestinians who live inside the West Bank, but you also have 500,000 settlers. And our job as the army, and this is, when I was in the army guarding settlements, I was told exactly what to do with Palestinians, what areas to make sure that they don't approach, what to do if I see them trying to attack someone, what I do if I see them, even coming close to an Israeli civilian or going down a road that's close to Israelis or working on fields that's too close to an Israeli settlement. But no one ever gave me any sort of command or even idea of what I'm supposed to do if I actually see settlers being violent. And I say that because our job, first and foremost, in the Israeli military is to protect Israeli settlers. So I think those are two really, really important things to kind of put on the table because they really kind of inform us how our policy looks on the ground. Now, as Mohamed mentioned, he lives in Hebron, and Hebron is the largest city in Palestine after East Jerusalem. There's about 230,000 Palestinians who live there. But in addition to that, it's also the only, together with East Jerusalem, which Israel has annexed, so it's under Israeli civil law. Even though that annexation is, of course, not recognized, it is occupied. But here in Hebron, within the context of there being military boots on the ground, is the only city in the West Bank in which you have Israeli settlers inside a Palestinian city. All the other settlements are like in the periphery. They're in the suburbs, if you will. And there's around 800 Israeli settlers who live in Hebron. And at any given moment, you have around 650 soldiers who are in the city of Hebron guarding those settlers and trying to basically, police the Palestinian population and make sure that they don't lift their heads up and harm Israelis, both the military and civilians, right? And again, that control is indefinite. And so I think that just is important to kind of give the understanding of the numbers that we're talking about here. A lot of Palestinians, not that many settlers, but about an equal amount of soldiers who are guarding them on a daily basis. And so there's two things that I want to mention really quick before handing it over to Mohamed of how we function in a city like Hebron. But I'm giving Hebron as an example, but this is relevant for the whole entire West Bank. So in the military, we have in occupied territory a policy of separation, right? And the policy of separation is basically areas where Palestinians have limited to no movement. And the idea behind that is that whenever there are Israeli civilians, Israeli settlers, and Palestinians in the same area, there's potential for friction and then there's potential for violence between them, right? We also know, and this is something that we have a lot of testimony on at Breaking the Silence, that a lot of time that that violence is purposeful, right? Today, there's a march in East Jerusalem, right? Part of it's probably still going on, but in the last hours of thousands of Israelis walking through the east part of Jerusalem, in the old city of Jerusalem, that is a Palestinian Muslim majority area. Not just majority, it's completely Palestinian. It's completely Muslim. It's completely Palestinian. There are also Christians there, but it's completely Palestinian. And Israeli Jews who are kind of like ultra nationalists are going on a march, walking through that area. And the army or the police in that case is closing shops to Palestinians. Palestinians cannot open their own shops so that Israeli Jews can walk there. And we've already seen so much footage coming out of this of Israeli, honestly, almost children. I mean, like 14-year-olds, 15-year-olds, 16-year-olds beating up Palestinians, journalists and others, right? And so a lot of times that violence is very purposeful. And so if I jump back to Hebron, where there's settlements, and so that friction is, of course, going to happen all of the time, the Israeli army is constantly thinking, well, our job is to protect the settlers. How do we protect the settlers? We want to limit this friction. So how do we limit that friction? Let's separate between Palestinians and Israelis. But as the military, and this was my experience very much, but it's really the experience of almost every soldier, we are only given commands of how to police and how to deal with and how to use military law on Palestinians. Settlers were either told nothing, or at very best were told, try and push, move them back, or try and, at the very, very most, detain them until the police comes. But even that, not really. We don't have jurisdiction over settlers in practice, yeah. And so the way that this has been developed into a policy is that the military systematically keeps Palestinians away from areas where the settlements are, right? And right now, where Mohanad is sitting, and he'll speak about this in more detail, is behind this house, and in front of this house, you have other Palestinian homes like the one that Mohanad is in, but then you also have Israeli settlers who are neighbors, right? You can imagine there's a lot of violence that happens in this area. And so what the Israeli army has done in Hebron is it's created 3 basic levels of separation. The first level of separation is areas where Palestinians cannot drive their cars. Yeah. And so there's one road that you drive in if you're Israeli, or if you're a tourist, when you drive into Hebron on this one road coming from an Israeli settlement, you drive on this road and most of the shops are closed. And why? Because Palestinians can't drive their cars there. And traditionally, these shops were shops that sold kind of major electronics, like a refrigerator. So the person who owns the shop, how are they supposed to get the refrigerator there? And then if another Palestinian buys it from them, how are they supposed to get that refrigerator from that shop to their home, right? So you can see, obviously, this really harms economic activity and daily life. And that once people can't drive somewhere, it completely changes the reality. The next level is areas where those shops are actually closed by military order, right? And so as you go farther into Hebron and you start approaching where the Israeli settlements are, including close to where Mohanad is now, there's a lot of areas where by military order, shops can't open. And this is exactly what we saw. Sorry to jump back to East Jerusalem right now, but this is exactly what we saw in Jerusalem in the march today, that police said, well, Israelis are coming on this violent march, and so we are going to close the shops of Palestinians, right? And by the way, this march, its origins are in Hebron, where every weekend, every Saturday almost, there's a similar march in the old city of Hebron in which Israelis walk through this area and the army shuts the shops down in the old city. I don't know, Mohanad, maybe you know, but I don't know actually if that's been happening since October 7th, but it's traditionally something that's happened a lot.
Yeah, it's happening. It never stopped.
It never stopped. Yeah. So you can see, like, so much of so much stopped. This didn't stop, right? And the third level is when you get close to areas that are very, very close then to the Israeli settlement, or even are approaching the Israeli settlement. You have what we call in the army areas that are sterile, which means they're clean from Palestinians. That's the word that we use in the Israeli military. They're sterile roads. These are roads that Palestinians cannot walk on, cannot drive on, cannot open shops on. They cannot be there. And so, for example, Mohanad, sorry to put you on the spot, but said that, he was born and raised in Hebron, and the last time that he was able to walk on the largest street in Hebron, called Shuhada Street, was sometime around the year 2000. And we see that kind of like hard violence between Palestinians and Israelis make this tend to close areas further. Again, but it's only policies that are placed on Palestinians. It doesn't matter who starts the violence. It's very clear who's paying the price. And the collective price being paid is by Palestinians. And the closer that you get to settlements, the more restrictions that there are. So that's one thing. The second thing I'll say, and I'll say it very briefly, and then I'll hand over to Mohanad, who I think can also explain it from his experience much, much better than I can, but, is things like checkpoints and checkposts. Checkposts are, I don't know how you guys talk about it in the US military, but checkposts is like a temporary checkpoint. And so you have permanent checkpoints in Hebron. You have 86 different kind of like checkpoints and barriers that exist in Hebron alone. Again, all of these are near the settlements that then define where people can and can't walk, where they can go through, that make their lives much, much less accessible, right? At the same time, so much of this kind of setting up a check post or even having a permanent checkpoint that sometimes is run and sometimes isn't run, part of it is to create separation, but the other part goes back to this idea of indefinite control, which is how do you control so many people who outnumber you by huge amounts? You constantly need to get them to feel that their head is down, right? That they can't resist against you, and that can be violent and it can be non-violent. I mean, Mohanad and other people at Youth Against Settlements are doing completely non-violent resistance. It doesn't matter, and because it's still standing up to the occupation, it's still standing up to that control. And so one of the ways that we do that is basically this concept that I won't get too much into, but it's called making our presence felt. And it's basically, how do we get Palestinians to feel like we are present at any moment or could be present at any moment when practically we don't actually have the number of people to do that, right? And so part of that idea is just making it so that Palestinians in Hebron never know when this checkpoint will be manned, where a checkpost will be, where there's a patrol even stopping people and not letting them go onto certain streets or into certain areas, right? And so these are some of the major things I would say that that function in the city of Hebron and again in the West Bank in general. And maybe the last thing I'll say before handing it over to Mohanad is how much these restrictions and disorder create order for us in the army, because it's not necessarily that if someone now leaves their house in Hebron and wants to go to work, they might get to work on time. It might be no big deal, but you can never know when you leave your house and you go to work if that's the case. And these restrictions really, really play into that, right? And of course, this is in people's homes. This includes people's, some of these restrictions on not being able to walk on a sterile road means that some people haven't been able to leave their front door since the early 2000s when these policies were entrenched, we could say. So I think I'll leave it there for now, and hand it over to Mohanad to kind of explain his perspective and experience in how this control of movement looks like.
Yeah, and can I just, Mohanad, too, I think would be really great for viewers to kind of hear about too, because I know as Becca, as you were talking, right, when we're talking about this area, right, and I'd love to hear more from you, Mohanad, both about the that corridor that has all of the streets. Oh no, there we go. Sorry, cut out for a second. More of how those front doors are actually barricaded and soldered shut down that corridor in Hebron. But then also just to remind people, right, that when we're talking about this, we're talking about the West Bank, which is supposed to all be under Palestinian control in theory. And that has not been the case and has increasingly become less and less part of Palestinian control and more cordoned off by the IDF against international law, against everything that even the Israeli government is supposed to be doing, right? So I think that's just a context here, and that this is also to remind people, this is a different space from Gaza, which is currently under war, or like it is under invasion by the Israeli Defense Forces. But I think that's an important context here, that this is a separate place that is not controlled by Hamas, that is not has no ties to that, and is still experiencing these levels of intense control and occupation against both Israeli law and international law. Mohanad.
Yeah. First of all, like talking about in general, not only the situation in Hebron, but in general in the whole West Bank is almost similar. Hebron has a bit of different situation because it has a very clear example of apartheid. It has a very clear example of Israel's aggression in Palestine. Because when you walk in Hebron as a Palestinian, and I'm gonna talk as a Palestinian. I'm gonna tell about my experience as a Palestinian growing up here. Uh, Beka and other people who come to the country here have more rights than me as a Palestinian. I don't have any rights here. I'm deprived of my basic rights, such as the freedom of speech, the freedom of movement, whatever. For speaking to you, I could go to jail for 6 months just talking like that. And since the 7th of October, this happened a lot of times. Before the 7th of October, it used to happen, but especially after the 7th of October, thousands of Palestinians were arrested because they just said something to support Gaza or support the civilians in Gaza or to stand against the Israeli genocide in Gaza. And people who live in areas under Israeli army control, like such as H2, have been suffering since these settlements came here. When the Israeli army, when they blocked these front doors of Palestinian families, either on Shuhada Street or different other parts of H2, because H2 is not only, it's like it's a collection of different Palestinian neighborhoods surrounding the old city of Hebron, not only the old city itself, but also other areas. So that created an H2 area, which forms actually 20% of Hebron. And talking about H2, it's not just like a random area in the city of Hebron, which is known as the industrial capital of the country, the main business area. They control the heart of the city, which means they have killed the city in three ways: economically, geographically, and socially. When we speak about destroying the area and killing the area economically, Becca mentioned the story of the 1,800 Palestinian shops closed within the H2 area. And these 1,800 shops were the market, the hub market, the main area in the city, where didn't only have customers coming from Hebron to buy from all over the country. It had customers coming from all over the country, such as Nazareth, Haifa, Jaffa, Ramallah, even from Gaza. And now it's all shut. It's a ghost town. No, it's dead. Then destroying the area geographically, because it's the connection area between the connecting area between the north of the city with its south, and using the Shuhada Street, which is used to be the main street in Hebron, to move from an area to another, used to take people by walk maximum 8 minutes to walk it. Now you have to go around the hill and reach the other part of the city, which, if you want to walk, will take you an hour at least. And to drive, it's going to take you about 20 minutes, and it depends on the traffic, because the whole, like, to go from the south to the north, or from the northern part to the southern part, you have to use only that street. That's one street. Like, that's not Shuhada Street, so it became one only area. And in rush hours, it's crazy traffic, so it could take you 1 hour, sometimes 2 hours, to reach your home. For Ramadan invitations, sometimes we spend 4 hours on in traffic, because the main street in the city is closed. And it destroyed the area socially, because Palestinians, there are the 36,000 Palestinians who still live in H2 under Israeli army control, military control, settlers' mercy, are not allowed to have visitors, especially after the 7th of October. Before, it was almost the same case, but now it's crazier, it's harsher. Residents of H2, Palestinians, are not allowed to have visitors coming to their homes who live out of the checkpoints. Earlier, I was talking to a Palestinian friend who lives in the same area, or his family lives in the same area. He grew up in this area, and now he is married and he lives outside of H2, but he is registered as a resident by the Israeli authorities. He came to his home, to his parents' home, because they're over 80. So he basically assessed them because they live alone. And he comes to give them medicine, to take care of them. And if they want to go out or in, they go on a wheelchair. He pushes it. He crossed the checkpoint. They allowed him in. And after he walked for about 100 meters, five soldiers approached the man and told him that he doesn't live here. And he said, no, that is my family home. That's where I basically live also, because I spend time with my family. He told him, no, that's your father lives there. You don't live here. So they sent him back and they kicked him out of the area. But he told the soldier that actually my father and my parents are disabled. My parents need medicine. They need somebody to take care of them. And am I not allowed to reach their home? They told him, no, you cannot come. For the past 8 months, this man could not come into his parents' home to assist them. And the same story of either you have got a disabled child, or you even need whatever. This kind of laws, or not laws, I would say not only laws. It's like also a systematic uh, behavior from the army, from the Israeli military, from the Israeli government toward Palestinians who live in H2. And the presence of the army, the presence of the Israeli occupation here is not that when the army come here, they are not here to, because there could be a violence between the two sides only, but also like within the time that when you grow up here as a Palestinian, you see that you have basically no right to even defend yourself if you get attacked by settlers. And the army not only guard the settlers and protect them, no, they protect the violence of the settlers. They don't protect the settlers themselves, they protect the settlers' violence. And they sometimes participate themselves within these kind of aggressions and violations that settlers commit, and guard them, and also never testify on the side against the settlers, because sometimes the soldiers see what they see, not most of the time, I would say all the time, they see the settlers' attacks, but they would never do it, because even if there is like some soldiers who would do it, the commanders would prevent them. So you cannot speak against the settlers, and the settlers also have the power over the army. So they guard them, they help them to kick out the Palestinians. And there was a video from the South Hebron Hills where a soldier in an army uniform and a settler came before the army, and he was like attacking the Palestinians and trying to claim the land. And the man told him, I'm going to call the police. The police are on their way. And he said to him, the police are on our side. That's what the settler said on camera to the Palestinian. And when the commander came, he basically kicked out the Palestinians from their land, out of their land, and allowed the settler to be on the land that it doesn't belong to him or to the Israeli army. And he kicked the Palestinians out. And that shows you just that the settlers and army work together. It's not the army is not separate. After the 7th of October, the settlers here put on their army uniform. So they were not only settlers, they became settlers with an army uniform. And it's more dangerous because they have more power like that. They became in charge of the checkpoints, in charge of people's lives here. And that's how the system works. That's how the system works. They try to kick you out. For the first 3 weeks of the 7th of October here in H2 area, Palestinians were not allowed to even open their windows, not to only go out of their homes to get food, to open their windows. And after 3 or 4 weeks, they started opening the checkpoint 3 days a week, Sunday, Tuesday, Thursday, 30 minutes in the morning to leave, 1 hour in the evening to come back. And Friday, Saturday, the checkpoint's closed. And if you're 1 minute late from the checkpoint, they prevent you from passing. And when you pass the checkpoint, you get searched, you get checked. And what soldiers did a lot of times, imagine like in one area where like actually 3,000 to 4,000 Palestinians live, one part of H2, that you all have to pass in 1 hour. So let's say not all of them will go out of the house. Let's say the men will go out of the house to work and then buy something and come back home. You're talking about a few hundred people. And then when those people want to come back home, what the soldiers used to do is check people, take longer time to check people. And then it's 7 in the evening. It opens at 6, closes at 7. And then they say to them at 7, yalla, go. You cannot pass. The checkpoint closed. But they live inside of the checkpoint, so they have no other place. That's what the soldiers did on purpose, to torture, to make people suffer. And they had to just go back and be in the street. And that's what the soldiers used to do. So this is the checkpoints. And now, not all the checkpoints are operating. Around the entrances and exits of H2, there are 24 Israeli checkpoints on the main entrances and exits. And not all of them are operating. Like Tel Meda has 3 checkpoints operating here. 3 checkpoints here. One is closed completely, not operating at all since the 7th of October. One that is operating now 24 hours. Sometimes they close it, depends on the mood of the army. And then one opens until 7 p.m. for people to come through it. And if that one is closed, you have to go basically take a taxi, which is going to cost you money, and also about 20 minutes drive to reach the other checkpoint to enter to your home and walk for a long distance. So you never feel the occupation, as Becca said. It's not, as Becca said earlier, that the occupation or the army is mainly doing that to make their presence felt here. It's more than that. It's to make the Palestinians never feel settled, never feel calm, never feel safe. Because as a Palestinian, even while I'm talking to you, I have to pay attention around me because settlers can attack at any moment. They stole our water tanks a few days ago. They stole our lemon tree. They broke into the house after the 7th of October and put on here a tent and occupied the house for 2 weeks. They do this. So I never feel safe. Now, my feeling is I don't feel safe. I don't feel comfortable. I'm not comfortable because I have to keep thinking about if they come and attack, what do I have to do? Because the army is not going to protect me. Now it's more dangerous. They can shoot. They have guns. They have more guns. And this is how we feel as Palestinians every day living in the country. Just even driving to a different city, which is 30 minutes away from here, like Bethlehem, could take now 5 to 6 hours to just reach that city because of the blockades on the main roads. More than 750 Israeli new barriers were created after the 7th of October to make the life of Palestinians harder, and Hamas doesn't exist here. And because Israel loves to use this kind of speech, this kind of excuse that we're attacking in Gaza because of Hamas. But if you are planning to end Hamas, why do you want to bring settlements back to Gaza? Why do you want to take settlers back to live in Gush Katif in Gaza? Why now they have decided that they are gonna 6 settlements around the north, they are gonna rebuild them and bring settlers to live there? It's because it's about controlling the land. Every day, the space is shrinking for us as Palestinians. There are more lands, more spaces taken from us, and we have no place to go. We have no place to live. And if you live in H2, there, for example, you have no right to drive, but you have also no right to fix your home. You have no right to build a new house. If your son is getting married and you've got an apartment and you want to build a second floor, you don't have the right to do that. And everything you need to do, you need to ask for a permit from the Israeli civil part of the army, which is the Israeli civil administration, and they don't really give it to you. So the space is shrinking for Palestinians. They're confiscating more and more lands every day. Their violence of settlers is growing every day, and there's nothing is stopping it. The Israeli government, and it's not necessarily Netanyahu, because I don't believe that if anybody else in the Israeli government now, Lapid, whoever is in the government now, would really do different from what Netanyahu is doing, because it's an occupation policy. The problem is not Netanyahu personally. It's not about his. It's the problem is the occupation, because there's something very important. Because some people, especially outside this country, they think that the problem is Netanyahu. They think if Netanyahu goes to jail, everything will end. No, it will not end. Netanyahu deserves to go to jail. I'm not gonna say that he doesn't deserve to go to jail or to be prosecuted by the ICC, but people need to understand that the system of the occupation itself needs to end. So it doesn't matter who is there in the position cannot do this anymore, because before Netanyahu there was a different government. For this right-wing government, there was a different government, and it did the same to the Palestinians. They bombed Gaza in the first 3 days of them in the office. They bombed Gaza. They killed Palestinians. The settlements in the West Bank since the Al-Aqsa, since '67, it is only growing. It has never stopped. Doesn't matter if it's Lapid in the government, if it's Netanyahu, if it's someone else, and if Gantz comes tomorrow, he will continue doing the same and supporting settlers. So now it's too bad because settlers are in control, so they are actually serving themselves, doing everything they want, cleaning files of criminal settlers and hiring them in offices of ministers, Israeli ministers from settlements in the country, like Tzvi Sukkot and other settlers who are actually now becoming the people who are actually making decisions in Israel. And it's more dangerous, it's more dangerous. And we see that this kind of people and the way they think and their mentality is to only harm the Palestinians. And they don't want the war to stop. They are fighting to never make the war stop. And it doesn't matter what are the conditions of a new deal. They don't want a ceasefire. They even Smotrich yesterday wrote a tweet that he is talking about the defense minister, Gallant, and he said, you minister said once that you're going to bring Lebanon to the Stone's Age. He's basically asking to launch a huge attack on Lebanon and to continue attacking Gaza. And Smotrich himself appeared from near Tulkarem, saying that that the army should deal with Tulkarem and Nablus and Jenin and the West Bank as they're dealing with Gaza. This kind of mentality is in the Israeli government now. And with this kind of people in position, there will never be a solution. The solution has to come from the world. The world has to force Israel to give Palestinians a solution. If the world does not do that, the Palestinians will never have a solution, because Israelis will not wake up tomorrow morning and say we are going to give Palestinians a solution, because Israelis are privileged. They are not feeling the occupation. They're not paying any price for the occupation, and they have to be forced to do that. And H2 area situation is not only in H2, it's all over the country. In H2 it's harder, but what we're seeing that if this does not end, if this does not stop, if there is no stop for this, H2 settlements will also grow up more and more and become everywhere in the West Bank, and we will have no space as Palestinians.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Mohammed. And yeah, I mean, I think you're exactly right. This is something that is, I think, exacerbated by the current Israeli government and the extremism that is at place there, both within the cabinet, within the ministers, as well as Netanyahu himself. But it doesn't end magically tomorrow if a new government comes in. And I think we've seen that over the past decades. So thank you for highlighting that. I know we've got, I'd say we started a little late, so I'd say we probably got about 12 to 15 minutes left. If we want, we've got one question so far, and I know, Oscar, you had some other questions that had come into you, but we got one from YouTube, from Alexander McCoy, who also coincidentally used to be is a co-founder of Common Defense. But the question is, what kind of rules of engagement do IDF soldiers guarding these settlements and checkpoints have? And so for those kind of joining us who may not know all the military lingo, right? When we talk about rules of engagement, those are the rules that we as military soldiers are supposed to use, right, when we are in different environments, right? So they change from place to place. They are generally for us very regimented in what we are allowed to do in terms of detainment, use of force, all of those types of pieces that go into these types of environments and that command and control aspect. And so we kind of know, from our standpoint, what we've been told to use in previous engagements and previous wars. But maybe Becca, if you could speak.
Yeah,
maybe we could give a brief what is technically the rule of engagement, right, and then maybe how that is subverted. Yeah.
So I think, first of all, it's important for me to say, so I served between 2008 and 2010. So I served almost a decade and a half ago. Even then, a lot of what we're talking about happened, right? But now I would say a lot of those processes that we see are kind of, are much more intense, if you will. But also in terms of the actual rules of engagement, we've seen that they've become much more lenient over time. And so before October 7th, the rules of engagement had more or less gotten to a point where if a Palestinian threw a stone but was not a danger to anyone, or was no longer holding a stone or a Molotov cocktail, right, was running away, that it was now in the rules of engagement that you could shoot them. Now, technically, that was supposed to be only if they had thrown it towards civilians. But a lot of times, we see practically that in almost all cases in which Palestinians have been killed, it's not actually checked very formally, right? Meaning the odds of a soldier sitting in jail for something like that is very, very small. And the times when it's mainly happened in recent years has been when it's gotten international attention, right? So when the Palestinian journalist Shireen Abu Akleh was murdered, it was checked, though no one is sat in jail for that, right? It was found to be a mistake, and no one sat in jail. Everything else that's not just actually shooting, things like what do you need in order to detain someone, to arrest someone? In terms of the West Bank, that is incredibly lenient. You don't need a reason to detain someone. You can detain someone because you want to detain them, right? And I think in that sense, it's important to remember the rules of engagement for years had been more strict when it came to shooting, though again, they've become much more lenient. But the rules of engagement on almost everything else, detaining, arresting, sometimes you'll find that arrest was not done technically legally. But still, detaining, arresting, this isn't a checkpoint, but for example, going into people's houses, you don't need any sort of, order in order to go into someone's house. You just need to want to go into their house. Is that the rules of engagement, and a lot of those things are actually quite vague, and I would say purposefully so, because when so much of what we're doing is trying to make our presence felt, and as Muhammad said, and I really agree with him, make them feel unsafe, right? Our safety is dependent on them feeling unsafe. Then you're going to have a vagueness in there so that you have a lot of ways to operate. Maybe the last thing I'll say on this, again, it's quite connected to rules of engagement, though it's slightly to the side of it. Is that Israel now uses facial recognition technology on Palestinians in the West Bank without their permission, right? And in fact, in Hebron, where Muhammad is, they even have a facial recognition and camera set up near the settlements that's called Hebron Smart City. So that means that if you're walking in Hebron, you are almost always on camera. And then also soldiers have kind of, some smartphones that have this facial recognition technology on them. And so that facial recognition technology, when someone stopped, sometimes tells a soldier, let them go, call the operation room, or arrest them. Yeah, so that's also kind of it's another tool that's come into the rules of engagement, but it's also not, you don't need that in order to stop, arrest someone, or even, quite aggressively physically check them.
Well, and I think to that point, Becca, when we were there, and yeah, go ahead.
To be honest, the rules of shooting, I feel that there are no rules actually. You can do whatever you want as a soldier, especially after the 7th of October. I was shot at 2 months ago, 8 bullets by a soldier. Me and my friend, we were shot at by a soldier, 8 bullets. We almost got killed for only making an interview near the checkpoint in Bab al-Zawiya, near it's like just out of H2. 3 soldiers came out, chased us, shoot at us, almost killed us. The bullets were passing like this. Luckily, none of us got hit and got killed. But I feel that the rules of shooting for the army, there are no rules. It depends on do whatever you want for whatever. Dealing with Palestinians, it just feels that they can do whatever they want, and there's almost most of the times, majority of the times, there is no accountability for soldiers' violations, and if there are some rules, it's just there, but it's never used, never followed, and there is no accountability for people who break these rules. So for me, it's just there are no rules.
I want to add.
That's an important distinction too, because it is. Well, I'll just say, sorry, Becca, that not that like the our U.S. military was ever perfect. It never has been, right? But when we talk about that, when we were in Iraq, Afghanistan, doing these things, there was a lot more control and consequence to soldiers who were kind of breaking outside of those rules of engagement. They weren't always followed either. But I think the difference is the systemic way in which not only is it, a few bad soldiers who do things and maybe get in trouble. This is something that is, no one is ever getting in trouble for this by design, right? It's always defaulted to you did no wrong, you're absolved.
We have we don't have, for at Breaking the Silence, we don't really like, we're now starting to collect testimony since October 7th. I forgot to mention, but I agree with Mohammed. I mean, I think that in the sense that even before October 7th, it was incredibly violent. It's important to me to say that in 2023, before October 7th, more Palestinians had been killed in the West Bank by the Israeli military than all of 2022. And all of 2022 was more than all of 2021. But between October 7th and today, around 5 Palestinians have been killed in the West Bank. That is a huge number. How many days has it been since? It's been 200 something days since October 7th, and over 500 Palestinians have been killed. And no one is going, no one is sitting in jail for that right now. I feel very confident about that. And I don't want to get into too much details about it because I know we're going to end soon, but it is important for me to add also, because since a military practice, which is so inherently violent towards Palestinians, you also have violent settlers who were enlisted, some with violent backgrounds, including in Hebron, very close to where Mohammed is right now, were enlisted into the army, who were carrying out that violence in military uniforms as soldiers near their homes. 5,500 settlers were enlisted into what's called like regional defense units, where they're supposed to kind of guard around areas of settlements, right? But they were the same people who a minute before that were the violent civilians kicking Palestinians off their land, kicking Palestinians out of their homes, harming people. Those people now had military uniforms and, M16s, M4s, or Tavors, right? So just the level of violence since October 7th has skyrocketed to, Mohammed is certainly not the only example that we see of someone doing nothing and getting shot at by the military.
To jump in really quick, first of all, thank you to both. And Mohammed, your safety is always paramount. I mean, that's super key. And so we super appreciate you being here. I mean, we can definitely see you making sure that you're okay in your area. There's a couple of things I wanted to bring up. Rebecca, I think your example of the refrigerator is almost spot on, because going back to what I said a little bit earlier about our next conversation, that example is there in that film. An individual, a family wants to go buy a refrigerator, and then the situation changes because of the actual checkpoint. Mohammed, I do have a quick question for you. You were saying if checkpoints do close, can you give us an example of what a Palestinian has to do when there's no way getting home? What would be a story? What would happen for a Palestinian?
No, you'll end up to if a soldier says the checkpoint's closed, you can't even negotiate. Because negotiating or trying to fight back or trying to talk, it means you end up detained for disturbing the army work or service. Mafrei Lachalim in Hebrew, they say. And what you have to do is to walk back. And then you'll be on the street. So you'll have to call a friend, to see a relative, to stay over the night in their home. You can't do much about it. If you want to complain, etc., you have to speak to the Palestinian Authority, but they really can't do anything to you because they themselves have no control, even over the whole country. They don't have control. So if the soldier says no, then you have to go back, and you'll be on the street, and you'll need to find a place to stay with your friends or relatives until they open the checkpoint again, so you can come back to your home. And many times the checkpoint was open, and the soldiers say that you can't pass. He decided that you personally can't go, and you cannot go. Like it happened with me, it happened with other Palestinians living in H2. They prevent you from coming, and they say they don't even want to talk back to you. They just say no, go out. That's it. So it does not need to be specifically closed to only like be prevented from using it. No, it can be operating, and they still prevent you from going, because it depends on the mood of every soldier. It's if the soldier doesn't like how you look like, he can prevent you from going home. and nothing will happen.
Thank you for sharing that. I just have one more comment to the stories of both you were telling, and then Jacob was introducing as well. When it came to the rules of engagement, I think, right, as former veterans, we all understand the discipline, right, the quote unquote discipline that you're supposed to have when it comes to the smallest things to the biggest things, and leaving the vagueness. I think, and there's where there's the room of error, and when you have a room of error in a heightened situation, it can lead to massive amounts of complication and doubt, which is the last thing you're supposed to have, right? When we're operating in a military area or in a military situation. I just can't imagine that's one of the many contributing factors that we see to a lot of the violence. Jacob, I'll kick it back to you.
Can I just say one thing about that?
Yeah.
I swear the last thing is just, I think it's also important that we remember. I agree, and also I think it's important that we remember that. I know that as like former soldiers, it's we often think about military areas, but these same areas are people's homes. Like they're not military areas; they're civilian areas. People live there with their families and grandmas. People have kids there. If you live in the area where Mohanad is and you're pregnant, you have to leave the area because 5 months into pregnancy, because if there's complications, there's no way to bring an ambulance. 5 months, 7 months into pregnancy, and I just think it's important that as we end tonight, we remember these aren't military areas. We've created indefinite military areas out of civilian lives, and I just think in this like really heightened moment of violence, it's important that we remember that.
Yeah, I think it's a powerful reminder because it is, I think we do to that point. Like as soon as a settlement, a new illegal settlement moves in, as soon as that decision is made, then that area, which is Palestinian, now becomes the settlement area, and then the area around that becomes a military control area by the IDF. Right. So not only is the settlement land that is being illegally taken now no longer under Palestinian control, but the area surrounding that then also is lost because the IDF creates their buffer zones around these illegal settlements instead of saying, no, you are not supposed to be here, leave. And so that is systemic, and it continues to this day. So thank you all so much for joining us. It looks like we had about 400 people join the live stream on our different platforms. So thank you all for being with us, for watching, and for being a part of this movement to ensure that our common humanity is seen, and that the freedom of movement is not something that is only accessed by a privileged few, but that the human right to freedom of movement, to freedom of self-determination is something that we all have, and something that we all will hopefully continue to have and will have one day. Mohanad, thanks again. Becca, thank you so much as well. And Oscar, always good to see you, my remote coworker. I will just say for the last little bit, on our end, the housekeeping, again, you can go to commondefense.us/ceasefire -2024 if you would like to sign on to our ceasefire, whether you are a civilian, a military family member, or a veteran yourself. You can go there. If you are a veteran and would like to write a letter to the editor in your local paper, we can help with that at organizing@commondefense.us. And you can join up to be a part of Common Defense at commondefense.us/membership if you are a veteran as well. Or you can sign up for our newsletter if you are a civilian supporter or military family member there. And then please remember to follow Breaking the Silence on all socials as well. For us, we are at Common Defense, at Common Defense on Twitter, and Common_Defense on Instagram. And we're also on Facebook and YouTube and TikTok. We're everywhere. Becca, I think it's BTS Israel on Twitter, and then Breaking the Silence Israel, all one word, on Instagram.
Yeah.
And I'll give maybe a 30-second closing thought from everybody, and then we can jump off. We'll start with Mohanad, if that's okay.
Yeah. No, I just want to thank you guys for organizing this talk. It's very important to always bring a Palestinian voice to talk about the situation from a Palestinian perspective. And I think we really need a lot of work outside of the country, outside of Palestine, especially in the United States and Europe, to make a difference, to make the change for us as Palestinians. Because we always say that without the unlimited support that comes to Israel from the West, Israel would never be able to maintain its occupation. So there is a lot on your back. We always need people's help to make the difference here. And thank you for joining today. And everybody's welcome to Hebron, absolutely.
It is a beautiful place. It is a beautiful place. And hopefully one day I will be back on that patio having a wonderful meal again.
You're welcome.
Yeah. Becca?
First, I also just want to plug follow Youth Against Settlements that Mohanad is a part of in Hebron. That's really important, and they're constantly bringing the realities to us. So definitely on Instagram and on Facebook, including Mohanad. I guess I'll also just end with saying I totally agree with Mohanad. The occupation is not going to end just because of an internal Israeli decision to end it. And I think that's very important. The U.S. is actively supportive of the occupation. That is not a new policy. That's not a new phenomenon. When I was in the Israeli military, I slept in American tents, and I taught soldiers how to shoot M16s and M4s. And that means that you have a role in what's going on here, and that means that you have a role in helping to bring it about an end. I think a big part of that, there is a very specific, concrete deal on the table that could lead to a ceasefire and be the first step to a permanent ceasefire, and also bring people home, Palestinians, hostages. This is something that we should all actively be supporting, and we need your voice there as well. But it doesn't just start and end there. We need to look towards new policy. And as I think U.S. vets and general as U.S. citizens, who so much of your tax money is going towards this, and so much of the political space being taken up in the U.S. is surrounding Israel Palestine, that also means that you have, not only do you have a right to a voice, but a requirement to use it. So please join us in doing that. And thank you very much for being here.
Thank you, Becca. You said it perfectly. I'm not going to say a whole lot more, folks. Thank you, everyone, for being here. The only thing I will say is to plug the next conversation that will piggyback off the idea of the control of movement. So the registration hopefully should be coming in the ticker at some point too. And if you can please register. Again, this is going to be a conversation with the executive producer of the film The Present, Dr. Mohanad Malis, and the director of the film, Farah Nabulsi. They will be there to be able to speak on the film that they created. Again, going back to the exact example that Becca gave about being able or not able to go buy a refrigerator and try to come back. I appreciate you both. Jacob, please close us out.
Yes, well, yeah, thank you so much. Excited for that conversation there. I think I will be helping co-host that one too.
Oh, and I forgot. If folks register early, you get access to the film so you can see it ahead of time. So please, please, please register so that you can get access to the film and see the short film ahead of time.
Yes. And yeah, thank you so much. There is the link. I know it's a little hard. I should have thought ahead and made that a fancier link instead of a whole bunch of weird capital letters, but it is there. You can type it in. And again, thank you all so much for being in this work for peace. And yeah, with that, I hope that y'all have a great night. I know it's late there for y'all. So thank you for joining us at 8, 9 p.m. your time, and we will let you go. I think for our U.S. audiences, hope you all have a good rest of your day, and that you have something to think on to work towards as we continue
Lovely day, everybody.
forward. Yes. Thank y'all.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.